I just want to welcome everyone first to the Borlaug Scholars Info Session Q&A. We've got some lovely panelists here today. We have Dr. Stephanie Schoberg, who's a plant breeder at Syngenta Vegetable Seeds, Dr. Chandler Levinson, who is a pepper breeder with Bayer Crop Science, and then also Dr. Christina Finnegan, who's a quantitative geneticist with Bayer Crop Science. And my name is Doug Vines. I'm an undergraduate with the University of Georgia, and I'll be running the panel today. And we also have some lovely moderators as well. We have Chen Liu, who's an undergrad at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. We have Garlene Carr, who is a research assistant at University of Florida. And we have Edgar Sierra, who is a PhD student at the University of Florida. With that, we're going to have about 10 to 12 minute presentations from our three panelists and then some Q&A at the end. So I'd like to introduce Dr. Stephanie Schoberg. Let me pull up her bio really quick. Dr. Stephanie Schoberg is a plant breeder at Syngenta Vegetable Seeds based in Woodland, California, where she leads the global processing tomato breeding program. Prior to joining Syngenta in 2020, she completed her PhD at Washington State University in wheat breeding and genetics. So with that, Stephanie, I'll be handing that over to you.
Thank you, and thanks to the entire organizers for inviting me to this. I hope I can share my limited experience, but my experience nonetheless. So just a little bit of background about me is I grew up in the Seattle area, so I'm kind of like a city girl. I never really knew anything about farming. And even in my undergrad, I didn't study anything related to plant science. I went to another city close by to Seattle. And I even studied bird evolution and speciation. It was my passion. I thought I was going to be an ornithologist. I ended up going into studying the phylogenetic relationships of certain species of fish in the Mississippi embayment. So my entire background was vertebrate ecology and evolution. I didn't take one plant class, but at the time I graduated around the economic downturn. So around 2010, and there was really no jobs. So what ended up happening is via an ad on Craigslist, I got a job as an intern for a pepper breeder at H.M. Klaus. So I moved from Washington down to Davis, California, which is right outside of Sacramento in Northern California, in the heart of agricultural land and especially vegetables. And it was my introduction to seed companies and plant breeding in general. And it's a really cool experience that kind of then got me rolled into a few other positions. I worked in a high throughput genotyping lab in Monsanto, outside of Davis also. And then finally I ended up spending about 6 years at Noonan's, which at the time was owned by Bayer. But I worked specifically in molecular breeding. So I worked with all breeders from all the vegetable crops to develop new markers for different traits. And during that time, I kind of realized how much plant breeding was similar to my passion for speciation and ecology. It was just a lot easier to nail down because I wasn't chasing a bird or something. The plants were right there, I could target it. It was something that I felt in the future I wanted a career in, and in order to achieve that, I needed to go back to grad school. So it's never too late. And I was in my late 20s when I went back, and I moved back to my home state of Washington and switched around from vegetables to wheat. And I did my degree there in the winter wheat breeding and genetics program, and focusing mostly on the genetics surrounding pre-harvest sprouting. It's totally different, but it gave me a lot of insight, and it also gave me the opportunity to be part of the NAPB, and especially part of the Borlaug Scholars program. So in 2019, I applied and I received the Scholar Award, and I went to Georgia. It was the last in-person before COVID, so I feel really lucky that I got that experience. And I had such a great set of connections between the industry the industry mentors, like my mentor was from Bayer, but also the connections that I made with the graduate students and their mentors. It was really eye-opening and exposed me to career paths outside of vegetables, not only like outside of vegetables, but outside of the West Coast. And I was seeing like what the career path was really like in corn and soy. And one of the biggest things for me was like important to see women in positions of leadership in industry, because that was really something I hadn't been exposed to in my experience in my short, 6-7 years in industry. And so seeing that was great. As I went on into my professional career, and I got the opportunity to become a mentor, and that has been even as rewarding, if not more, especially because I can continue to be part of this community. That it makes me feel like it inspires me a lot. Also, just seeing these people, young people who are coming up in the industry or in the academic sector, but also coming into industry, makes me like have some hope of what the future can be for plant breeding. And I learned so much from my mentees. I almost feel like it's an experience that I gain just as much from. So all of this being said, I wouldn't be where I am if it weren't for the Borlaug Scholar experience. And so I'll tell you a little bit about where I am now. I am at Syngenta Vegetable Seeds, and I don't want to go into too much detail, but I think most people are more familiar with the row crop side, so like corn, soy, but the vegetable seed division is a growing part of Syngenta, and I think we have a lot of cool products. We are growing in market share of the vegetable sales in the world, and we have tons of opportunities globally. So, I'm happy to chat to anyone about those opportunities at some point later. Feel free to send me an email or LinkedIn message. My job as I'm a plant breeder, but I'm specifically in charge of the global processing tomato breeding program. We have a relatively new program that was acquired when I started. So 2020, it's why I started. And I have had the opportunity to pretty much start my program from scratch, which is relatively rare in industry. And I think, it's challenging, but it's also been like a really cool experience. And processing tomato in general is grown across the globe, but more specifically, California is a massive producer of processing tomatoes. So I am based here, and I'm based more or less in that like sort of orange region outside of Woodland. So processing tomatoes, if you're not familiar, are anything that goes in a can, tube, a jar, bottle, anything that you see in the store that's stable. And I think that there might be some misconceptions about that kind of product. In reality, it's the freshest tomatoes you can get. We harvest, the farmers harvest ripe tomatoes straight from the vine, and within 6 hours they're canned and locks in that freshness. So you're never going to get that unless you have your own garden, really. And of course, like I take a lot of pride in the amount of data that we collect. It's very different than the typical beauty contest that vegetables have, and I'm very familiar with that side of it. But it's kind of cool. It's actually like the bridge between vegetables and row crops, perhaps. So I don't think that I need to tell anyone how to be a breeder, but the process that I go through every day is all related to where I am in the cycle. So that's kind of like a question is what you do every day. And I can't really say that it's depending upon which part of the cycle I'm in. But, of course, you want to grow your plants in the target environment. You collect data, you analyze it, you make selections, and you do that again and again. You make hybrids, you trial them, you take the data and you make advancements, and that's basically it. It's pretty basic, but there's a lot of moving parts and a lot of ways you can improve those parts. So all of which like I've learned a lot about in industry, but also coming from grad school. Oh, and in my industry, as is corn, soybean yield is king. It's again a little different from the other crops in vegetables, just because there's not as much of a beauty contest. Like, what does this look like? They're just, no one's really looking at an individual plant. Just last slide is just, out of many things I've learned, the takeaways that I think are like really key for me is, you know, communication and interpersonal skills. I cannot tell you, I can't, like, the only thing that's gotten me to where I am, I think, out of all these is probably that number one. And one of the important things I've learned, especially as a plant breeder, is like the relationships that you have with your partners, whether it's like your salespeople or your technicians, is key to success. Not only that, but external partnerships. So like, you know, I try to maintain my relationships outside of my industry, my particular company, because it keeps my eyes open and keeps me learning and challenged. And then as a plant breeder, you have to get to know your growers. Like, if you don't gain the trust and get some insight on what your growers need and what your growers are challenged by, there's no way you're ever going to create a product that solves that works for them. And the only way you could do that is being there. And I feel really lucky because I do work within the geographical region that I breed for. And it's like, it's been so rewarding for me to get to know my growers just down the street. And you know, like, there's something about that, like, relationship that you can't replace. And then two, you know, I know that technology is extremely important, and I believe in like data-driven decisions, but I do not think that you can understate the ability to know your crop in and out, to go in your greenhouse and know your parents, know your, like, go to the field and know exactly, be that person that, you know, your salespeople look to and say like, hey, what is this? And you know, like, you know, every little detail, like, you soak up every little information, you know, because like, you have to get your salesmen on board for selling your product. And if they know that you're the expert, it helps. And then the last two kind of go together, because planning is what's going to give you the work-life balance. If you want to succeed in industry and probably academia, having like the ability to look a year or 5 years ahead and know exactly your timelines and how you're going to achieve, you know, a product advancement or a product release in a certain amount of time, and how much labor you might need. I mean, that is all part of it. And in order to have a work-life balance, like, I think those are the pieces that you have to put together. And just my last thing is that if you don't, you have to pick your times. And I have found that the best times, this is very, like, it's a very specific thing, but I find the best time to take is between transplant and harvest, because you need that time to like reset yourself and get ready for like the real push. And you have to do that yourself, because no one's going to suggest that to you. Like, no boss is going to tell you to take a week off, you know, whatever. So that's what I've learned. And thanks to the Borlaug Scholar Program for helping me get to this position in life. And I hope I can continue to give back. So I'll stop sharing.
Thanks, Stephanie. I didn't know what Stephanie was going to say, but honestly, a lot of what I'm going to say is going to sound similar to her themes. I'm from the state of Georgia. I attended a small liberal arts school called Berry College because I was terrified to go to a giant school. I studied biology because I was interested in science, and I honestly just took the first position that was open in science. And that happened to be in a back cross breeding program. It wasn't something I planned. And to be honest, like, I helped infect trees with pathogens and then take morphological data. And I did not know what I was doing in terms of inbreeding and how it could impact people. But thankfully, my boss was a great mentor and let me help try to write a manuscript. He made some heavy edits. So it's great if you can look for a mentor that does want to develop you. You don't always have a choice, but look for lots of mentors that are willing to pour into you. And he said, you know, you're a pretty good writer. You should apply for graduate school. And I hadn't considered it at all. So it just takes one person to change your career. So when I was applying for graduate school, I still didn't really know what plant breeding was, even though I was doing it. And so I applied to crop science. I applied to marine biology. And just like Stephanie's story, I don't think you need to have it planned out. Like, you might land somewhere and love it. You just need to be open to opportunities and figure out what you love. So at the University of Georgia, I was ready to go to a big school, and I'm so thankful Dr. Peggy Ozias-Akins took a chance on me. I studied wild peanut species under her and just absolutely loved it. She took me on as a master's student, but let me change into a PhD, which is another thing I'd recommend if you can do it. So during graduate school, I actually applied to the Borlaug Scholarship program twice before I got in. So don't give up. It's competitive, but it's worth it. Just keep applying. I was jealous of Stephanie that year, but then I got to be a Borlaug Scholar the next year. And it was a virtual conference, but the program's really good about putting your face and name, even if it's virtual. It's now in person, but they'll have your face on a slide going throughout the conference, and people will want to talk to you. So prepare an elevator speech if you're chosen. But even though it was virtual, I reached out to mentors or to advisors to see if they had jobs open, postdocs. And I contacted Alan Van Dynes, and he had a position, and he was so enthusiastic to talk about it. And I don't know if he would talk to anyone, but I asked him after the fact, and he was excited to talk to me because I was a Borlaug Scholar. It gave me like a little edge. So I do think the program helps you with recognition because they've heard about you and they know you're a great student. Because this program, it really picks out the best in plant breeding. And then for undergrads that are aspiring to be in ag or plant science. So that postdoc was good. It helped me get into industry. Actually, there was another 2020 Borlaug Scholar, Natalie Kaiser, who was a pepper breeder, and they had an open role. And so she recommended me, which is amazing because we met through this program. So even your mentor helps a lot, but even just your peers that you meet can help you network. So I'm happy to be in industry now. One of the questions was what we thought about academia versus industry. And honestly, they're probably both great pathways. For me, I was a little picky about where I wanted to live, and there's not that many professorship opportunities. So I just had to be realistic. And I wanted to be a professor because I love mentorship. But I'm really happy to say you can mentor in industry. You can be a part of NAPB, who has lots of mentorship programs. We have internal mentorship programs. We can take on interns. So you can still do a lot of the things. You're not limited just because you go into academia or industry. So at Bayer, I'm an open field pepper development breeder. So I work with sweet blocky pepper. I work with some hot peppers, poblanos or anchos, and then also Santa Fe Grandes, which are conical, small yellow peppers that you can stuff with cheese. They're delicious and spicy. You should try. So breeding at Bayer has been split mostly into two roles: design, which they mostly focus. Design breeders focus on parental lines, thinking of new innovations we should bring in or new traits, developing germplasm pools, and then giving us great lines to the development breeder. And then that's where I step in and figure out what crosses to make to keep diversity, but also have the best chance of success. I also help make sure we have enough plots and trials and enough locations, but still being in the budget. I help figure out what traits we need to take. And I get to interact with the farmers and the people who work in sales and who look at market needs. And that's honestly the most rewarding part of the job, is interacting with who you get to impact and knowing you have a product that's going to meet a need that they tell you. So let's see. They also asked me to talk about advice for students. And so I've said before, mentorship's important. You don't need one mentor. Get as many as you can because they'll give you different perspectives and they can offer different things to you. If you're interested in industry specifically, improving your soft skills is so important. Being a leader, being able to work in a team, honestly, yeah, being able to work in a team, they would love to hire someone with technical skills, but if their choice is between someone who works in a team and is a leader and needs to be taught something versus someone who is a genius but can't work with others, they're going to pick the team player. But if you really want to work on something technical, I think your coding skills are important. I'm sure you've heard that. It's not necessary, but it's going to make your life so much easier to be able to work with some code. And then lastly, especially if you have an oral exam or an interview that's focused on plant breeding, there's a book called The Essentials of Plant Breeding by Rex Bernardo, which is so easy to read, and it's just going to help you so much. So I recommend, reading a chapter every once in a while to brush up. And then lastly, work-life balance. Like Stephanie said, that's what you make it. You should have a work-life balance now in grad school. And I know for some that sounds crazy, especially if you have a hard advisor to work with, but you have to learn how to say no and set priorities. And you should have a work-life balance before you start the next step in your career, because it's going to be hard to develop it once you're in industry. You should already, value yourself and your time. So far I've been working 8 hours a day. Sometimes I wake up at 6 a.m. for a meeting, and so I end early. I literally set reminders on my calendar to end early, so it can be done. Bayer's been flexible in letting us work like a hybrid remote, or working remote, which is nice. And they've said that we can work the hours that make sense. So if you want to work early in the morning or late at night, it's fine. Sometimes you have meetings that dictate that. And if we don't get to all the questions, like Stephanie, you can reach out to me at chandler.levinson@bayer.com. Thanks. I'll let Christina go.
All right. I also have slides like Stephanie, although there aren't that many. So I'll just kind of get started. A lot of what I say, I think, will echo what Stephanie and Chandler have said. Although I do think my position is a little bit different from theirs. So I'll try to kind of emphasize the differences that I see, just to provide a little bit of a different perspective. So a little bit about my background and just some context. I did my PhD in kind of breeding and genomics projects at the University of Florida. So I already know Edgar and Gerline. Hi, guys. And I graduated in December of 2021. And then I started my position now, which is a quantitative geneticist at Bayer. During my time at UF, I had kind of a lot of different projects that really had totally different questions and used really different kind of strategies and technologies. And that kind of at the time felt hard to focus on. But looking back, I think it helped me develop really useful skills in learning something new and identifying like what's the need to know, and not really getting lost in like all of the things that you could know about something, kind of like the 80-20 rule applied to kind of technologies. The ones that are most relevant to my role now were my projects looking into genomic prediction for our sweet growing breeding program. UAS, I was looking at kind of nutrient use efficiency, but it's just, I think, a really good tool to be familiar with. And then I also had some more bioinformatics related projects that were a little less breeding and a little bit more kind of basic science things. I looked at an RNA-seq project in sweet corn, and also a gene evolution kind of question involving nitrogen fixation. So that had to do with peanuts and other crops. A little bit about kind of my personality. I think this is important to talk about because everything we say is coming from a unique perspective, right? And also this panel is entirely people who have decided to go to industry. And I think that it's important to, at least for me, I think that comes down to like a really personal decision and what you think like makes you happiest and your personality works best for. So just to share a little bit about that, like I really enjoy taking an idea and really making it a reality, not necessarily following each idea and being super all over the place with what I want to explore, which I think is probably better in an academic setting. I enjoy kind of problem solving. I like learning new things and going into new areas, which I think is a really distinct possibility in industry. And I also love working with people. So I love bringing people together and having a truly common goal, which is really exciting an exciting part of industry breeding programs. Like every single person, the ultimate goal is getting the best variety in our growers' hands. And it's really uniting and really fun. I'm really enjoying that aspect of it. A little bit about my NAPB experience and my Borlaug experience. So this picture is actually from the 2019 conference as well. I was a Borlaug Scholar in 2020, but this was my first NAPB conference, and the 2021 was virtual, so I didn't have a picture, but here I am, and Chandler is somewhere in this photo, and I didn't realize it, but when I was looking through it to try to find myself to put the arrow, I found my current coworkers who I kind of met at the conference, but I didn't remember that until this picture. So it's just I think that just highlights, it's a great conference that really is the right group of people to be learning from and meeting and making connections with if you're interested in academia or industry and plant breeding at all. I'll talk a little bit about it, but I'm not as much of a kind of traditionally what you think of as a breeder as Stephanie and Chandler have kind of talked about, but it's still related to plant breeding, and I still think NAPB is a really great opportunity and conference to go to if you want to be involved in plant breeding at all. My mentor when I was a Borlaug Scholar was actually Chandler's advisor, so Peggy Aikens at UGA. And I thought she was just amazing. She made time for me. She was really helpful. She provided a lot of really good advice and feedback. I originally applied to the NAPB Scholar just kind of thinking about that mentorship opportunity and a little bit of the networking with other like industry folks or professors. I think at the time that I was applying, I really underestimated the value in the other scholars and making those connections. But looking back, I think it's one of my favorite parts. Even though our conference was virtual, our group made an effort to meet regularly virtually, which I think was actually a really good like silver lining, having everyone kind of be on board with Zoom meetings at that time. So we got to connect, I think maybe a little bit more as scholars than we would have alternatively, although I don't know for sure. So I look back and I think that's one of the greatest parts of it. As far as the mentorship goes, I reached out to Peggy for a lot of different things. She helped me practice presentations. She helped me with applications to internships. And ultimately, I'm pretty sure she shared the opportunity for the job I have now with me. So I think I can trace a lot back to the Borlaug Scholar Program and specifically to Peggy. But also in terms of how that is still impacting me now, I think at least 4 people from our 2020 Borlaug Scholar cohort now work at Bayer. And so it's really helpful in making such a big organization feel a lot smaller. It's easier for me to reach out to Chandler and try to learn more about her position and things that she's learning, and I can share the same for myself. And so that's really important even now. And I think it's one of the best things to come out of the NAP Borlaug experience. Although I do have to echo what Chandler said with the recognition that you get from being a part of the program, I do think helps others identify you as someone they might want to hire or work with in the future. So that's just a little bit about that. I think it's a great program. To talk a little bit, and I think it helped me get to where I am today, like Stephanie said, so I want to talk a little bit more about where that is and what my position really is. So Chandler mentioned this when she was talking. Our breeding program at Bayer is really kind of split now into 2 sections. There's product development, which is the team that Chandler is on. And I think that that is more of what you think of when you think of breeding. They're out there in the fields, they're making selections. Whereas product design is kind of the top of that breeding funnel. So if breeding is looking for the needle in the haystack, we're trying to find ways to put more needles in the haystack and then handing it to Chandler and team to try to really identify those and get those in the hands of the growers. So I'm on product design, and my position is quantitative geneticist. Which means that I am developing and improving our genomic prediction tools, finding ways to identify disease resistance genes or any other traits of that nature that we want to get into our germplasm and just improving the efficiency of that process so the very best things can get planted in the ground for then our development partners to really get to know, identify, find strengths, weaknesses, identify the needs of the growers, and have that constant feedback loop. I also have some breeding responsibilities, so I am in charge of the crosses that we make for part of our diversity program and also our main breeding program for the Southern Cotton Pipeline. I think this should have been on the intro page, but I'm from Florida and I now am based in St. Louis. So a little bit different from Chandler and Stephanie, I'm not really based where most of my growers or my fields are, but we have our development breeders who are closer to that actual cotton growing region. I'm based in our headquarters, which is where a lot of the other kind of people who work on the computer like me are. So we're kind of together, and then our development breeders are out there with the plants and making sure everything actually works. So that's a little bit about my position. And then we had some questions that were sent by Edgar and the organizers. So why did I pick industry versus academia? I think, like I said, there's a lot of pros and cons to both, but for me, the pros of industry just resonate more than the pros of academia. I think in industry, I don't think it's as rigid as you might think from the outside perspective in terms of like ideas that you can follow up on. But I do think academia probably has more freedom in that regard, in that you probably don't have to justify an idea immediately, whereas in industry, I think you have to say like, this is the business reason we want to pursue this idea, even if it's not realized yet. But for me, that doesn't really compare to what I see as like the major pros of industry, which are kind of like I mentioned before, like it's really a lot more teamwork in my experience. And I really like that any kind of new technologies we develop or ideas we have or strategies have that direct impact and ultimately like will lead to better varieties being grown by farmers across, in the case of cotton, the United States, but across the globe really, at a company like Bayer. In terms of skills,
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Is there someone asking a question?
No, Christina, Denise was just happy to see you.
Skills that I learned in my graduate degree that help and more emphasis on learning additional set of skills. I really have to echo the communication and soft skills that the others have mentioned. I think it depends on how close or far you are from pursuing a career in industry. If you're like a few years out, the answer could be totally different by then. It moves really quickly. And so the ability to learn new skills is like priority number one. But if you're, 1 or 2 years out, I can say if you want a position like mine, it would be really helpful to start thinking about like, how would you scale up what you're doing now? Like, would you organize it differently if 2 other people had to use your code as well? Like in my experience in grad school, like probably the way I had it organized wouldn't work if you wanted to expand that to a larger group of people. And so just practicing thinking about that is something that I think would get you set up to do well. If you have the opportunity to work with anything in like a SQL database, that would be cool. But like Chandler said, like people are hiring for your ability to learn, the expertise you're bringing, and your ability to be a team player in industry. And so like I didn't know how to use a SQL database, for example. But I've had the opportunity to learn that, and now I'm kind of the person for that on our team. I'm building those data sets. So you don't need to know that going in, but it is useful. And like, would it have gotten me a couple months ahead of where I am now? Probably. So that's just what I could think of there. But I do agree that the soft skills and the kind of quick learning and identifying the need to knows are more useful than any individual technical skill would be. Important things I've learned. I would say that it's a lot different than academia in terms of if you want to change something, You have to learn how to communicate that to a lot wider of a group of people than in grad school. At least for me, you know, I had to communicate with my advisor, the lab manager, and kind of get their thumbs up, but then it's your project, so you just move forward how you and they think is best. In industry, that's not the case. Because everyone is a big team working together, you have to be able to think about and get feedback from a lot larger number of people before you make a change or switch anything up. And then work-life balance, I would say it's really great compared to grad school. I agree with Chandler that you should be working on that while you're in grad school. And I really don't think I had a terrible work-life balance at that time. I do think it's a lot easier to establish that in industry. So I would say most of the time I'm also doing kind of like an 8 to 5 situation. I don't usually work on weekends. I say usually because I can think of 2 or 3 times over the past year that I've been in my position where I have during like real crunch times, like planting season or advancement season, when we have to make those decisions. And because it is a seasonal kind of thing, if you miss by a week, you really miss by a year. And so those deadlines are really, they're not arbitrary. And so I can think of a couple times where I worked on a Saturday, but it really is just like 2 or 3. And most of the time, if I'm not working, I'm not thinking about work, I'm really as good as unemployed on a weekend, which was not the case in grad school. I was really thinking about things even if I wasn't working on them. So with that, I think that kind of wraps up at least the questions that were sent to us. I'm really excited to kind of hear any other questions or comments from the other panelists. I'll stop sharing my screen. I can't find my.
Yeah, thank you to our panelists again. Lovely presentations. It's great hearing from everyone. To our attendees, those of you in the audience, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A. If you all like, I could talk a little bit about the application and what the Borlaug Scholars a bit more in detail real quick. So the Borlaug Scholars kind of scholarship program brings you to the NAPB meeting. This year will be in Clemson, South Carolina. And it's open to undergraduates and graduates. You are paired with a mentor, and you get to go and just meet everyone at the meeting and just kind of meet everyone. It's just a wonderful time. I can't really put it into a few words. I was there last time in Ames, Iowa, and I just feel like you get to meet all these professionals in plant breeding and network with people and, you know, really just have a wonderful time. I also believe the applications are due March 7th. So, you know, get those in. You will need some letters of reference. So I'd probably start asking for those about now. But I can't stress how much I would encourage you to apply and tell people that you know to, you know, look at this, because you get to go to the meeting for free. They'll cover your expenses. And I know that's a hurdle for a lot of people. So, pardon, if anyone has anything else to add on the Borlaug Scholars program, feel free to. Otherwise, I may start asking some questions myself. And let me think. I'm trying to figure out how to put the link into the Q&A, because I think we have a chat and a Q&A, and the attendees can only see the Q&A. It's at, the link is at, I'm going to read out to y'all if I can scroll up. Plantbreeding.org /Borlaug-Scholars. If you just look up NAPB Borlaug Scholars, you'll find it real quick. It's a pretty simple application. And then I guess my question, oh, we got some in the Q&A. From Don Cummings. So our panel is all women. I don't think that was deliberate. I think that's just the people we thought to reach out to because they're all wonderful, wonderful plant breeders. And I guess panelists, if you have any comments about the diversity in the Borlaug Scholars Program. Before I ask y'all, I will mention we have also the George Washington Carver Scholars Program, which is similar to the Borlaug Scholars Program, but specifically for diverse groups. But I know also Borlaug Scholars is a pretty diverse group. So I'll hand that off to y'all.
Yeah, actually, when we were planning this panel, we tried to contact the previous Borlaug Scholars, both working in the industry, academia, the ones who did a graduate degree or without. But due to the planning conflicts, Christina, Stephanie, and Chandler are the 3 panelists we finally got. But Borlaug Scholar, it is a very diverse program. And when you're choosing your mentor, they're encouraged you to put your specific needs, like if you want a mentor paired up in the academia or industry, or someone shared the similar cultural background with you. So I found this really important, especially I am an international student myself.
So if anyone here's a were you gonna say more?
Sorry, I was just asking any more questions.
So if any grad students are here and they're going to apply, there has been a diversity, equity, and inclusion question added to the application. There has been a question related to that, but it wasn't as explicit. So if you have worked in this space, it will give you a leg up when you're applying. But diversity, equity, inclusion is important, and that's a big reason for the George Washington Carver Scholarship to be created as well. It's open to undergrads, so we want to have undergrads joining and graduate students. The program's been good with male and female, but I think we could be even stronger getting more international students, to be honest. I don't know if Christina or Stephanie want to add.
I would just say that I've been less involved in organizing than you have, Chandler, but for our cohort of Borlaug Scholars, I remember noticing a really great gender balance. But like you said, I think there's always work to be done on overall diversity and inclusion.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that we, as an industry, on the industry side of things, have a lot of catching up to do in terms of gender balance, and also, I mean, almost more gender balance than like ethnic diversity. And I'm not upset to see more females in a Borlaug Scholar representation, but and mainly because I think for some reason something happens in industry, and I realize on the scientist side, maybe more like on Christina's side, it's more common to have like a better balance. But I mean, I can speak from my personal experience. I am the only female vegetable breeder in, as far as solanaceous crops go, in all of the Americas for Syngenta. And my boss is a man, and my boss's boss is a man, and my boss's boss is a man, boss's boss's boss is a man. And it literally goes up, and there's no one above me that's a female. And that's not strictly Syngenta, that is everywhere. There are a few key females that I think get put into positions as they should, but a lot of times in breeding, it's hard to be a breeder and be a female in a family unit sometimes. And I think the reality of that is like not stated enough. Yeah, I mean, personally, like I don't have any children, but if I were to think about it, like truly it would be tough to find the time to take and not have a permanent impact on my breeding program. I mean, it's hard facts that you can't get away from.
Yeah, I would say that is kind of reflective of what I see, and I agree with your point. I would say on my kind of end of the breeding program, it does look a lot more balanced in terms of men and women versus when you get into the more, again, traditional breeder roles. I am happy to see in NAPB this relatively, at least it appears to me, even representation of men and women in the Borlaug Scholars, and I'm really loving this female panelist situation we've got going on. because we still, in the breeding world, need that representation.
Yeah, an easy answer to the question I just realized is the student organizers. I mean, y'all are great. Y'all were all scholars last year, and so y'all are a great example of the diversity in the program. And hopefully with the mentors you have, we're gonna get you help. Well, I mean, y'all are doing it yourself, the hard work, y'all are exceptional, but hopefully y'all are entering industry and academia. So yeah, you can give us diverse perspectives too.
I have a question for the panelists. So it was really nice to learn from all of your experiences. And I know probably you touched on this already, but what are the two main things that you take from the Borlaug Scholarship for your career?
The two main things that I took, I think I touched on it, but first in priority to me is the connections and the positive relationships that I was able to make with my mentor and with the fellow Borlaug scholars. Like I said, I can still, I have that connection now with Chandler, for example. And there is connection across Bayer organizations, but it's such a large company and in such a large field as like plant breeding. I wouldn't necessarily be interacting with our vegetable development breeders on a regular basis, but now I'm able to have that connection and we can reach out to each other if there's an opportunity that we're interested in, or if I see something that I think Chandler would be interested in, and that's true across the board and across the program. I think it's just a great opportunity to have a bunch of people that now you know, and you've built these positive relationships, and you can kind of look out for them and they can look out for you. The second would be the experience of, you know, you get to present your research at the program, at the conference, and that's just a good professional development opportunity in your presentation skills, which all of us here have emphasized as communication and soft skills. So it's like a chance to practice in what I would consider like a pretty supportive environment. I think the NAPB conference is a really good one for doing that as a grad student and presenting your research to people who are interested in plant breeding, and I think very kind in terms of how they will give you feedback.
You want to go ahead, Chandler, or?
You can go.
Okay. I mean, I feel like I'm similar to Christina, but maybe just to be a little different. I think the community aspect has been something that like I look back on now as like, oh wow, like I have a built-in like group of people who understand like my weird job, like, you know, and also who understand, like, I mean, yeah, that alone. And then two, I think exposure to the research, like even being in industry for like, I guess like I've been out of grad school since 2019, and it's really easy to like get stuck in a cycle of like what you know and what you're exposed to in your own little world. And most of the people in your world at the company have been there longer than you, and so they are even more removed. And so I really do take like actual research learning and like ideas from those going to the conferences, and going to the conferences is because I'm a Borlaug. Like also in industry, like we aren't really let out very often, and so we don't get to go to these conferences all that often. So as a mentor, I've been allowed to go and expose myself to that. So I think those are my two.
In order to not also just repeat what they're saying. So you could also, even if you like don't get into the program or you want to start getting connected soon with this like great community, you could join the graduate student working group at NAPB. You can find them on Facebook, LinkedIn, I think. So there's ways to start building your network without necessarily doing this program. Though I think this program's great because your mentor's with you for hopefully a year, but you know, maybe they'll continue check in with you for life. So yeah, there's ways to get plugged in without this program, but I would definitely encourage you to apply.
Just as like to piggyback on that, I'm still like extremely close with my mentor, and like I talked to her on the phone last week. So, and she works for Bayer, so it's not like we're just like and it's a very, like, it's been a very fulfilling experience. How many years later? 4 years later now.
Yeah, I just wanted to have a follow-up question about that. Like, you all seem to have great relationships with your mentor. What kind of tips you want to give, like, for upcoming scholars on how to maintain that kind of healthy relationship with your mentor?
I'm going to go ahead and start. Don't be shy. Don't wait for your mentor to reach out to you. Yes, they should, and they will. But I mean, everyone's busy, so don't feel like you're bothering them. They signed up, so like, reach out. Tell them what you expect, like how often to meet, if you want to meet monthly or bi-monthly, and tell them what you want to get out of it. There's something called like active mentoring from the mentee's perspective. I was really lucky. I got JD Russo to mentor me. He's like the veg of R&D. And so because his time's so precious, like I would set up almost like an agenda before I met with him to make sure he felt like his time was valuable, and that we really got something out of it. So you can do some work on your side to make your mentoring experience better, but just don't be shy.
I actually write on my planner that, for example, at certain week of certain months, I'll write email my mentor, and it will remind me to at least shoot like a short follow-up or what is happening in my life right now. And so far, I had a great time working with my mentor. He helped me read my graduate school application materials and also provide me with a lot of information about how to choose a good mentor in graduate school and what soft skills to earn. So this is kind of like the very, very, very valuable things I gained from Borlaug Mentorship.
I think the only other thing I will add is that, like, don't be afraid of them as a human being, and like be yourself, and they're human beings too, and you can like get to know their lives. And I don't know, I just think like sometimes that you're like it's normal to be nervous. Like I was super nervous at first, and then once I got to know my mentor Jennifer, she's just like someone that like I wish I lived close to, you know, like I would be friends, and they can be you could be friends with them. So they're not scary.
That's a good follow-up to what I said. Like, you don't always have to have a mentor where you set an agenda. That's specific to certain people. Like, yeah, you can go have like a drink sometimes if that's your relationship. Thank you, Stephanie.
Yeah, what I was going to say is pretty similar to Stephanie, although like I was feeling like kind of shy, and it feels like I've been a part of multiple programs where you're assigned a mentor. And for me, like at the beginning, I always feel kind of like, I don't know, it's just like a little bit inorganic. And so like my strategy there, like you can't be shy, you have to reach out, like Chandler said, like active mentorship. But one thing I like to do is kind of start the first few meetings with something that's a little bit more structured. Like, what do you think about like if you receive this resume, like, or can I practice this like short presentation I have coming up to an outsider, and you can give me that perspective. And it gives you a little bit of a chance to like make use of that feedback, but while you're developing that more personal relationship. And then you can go with a little bit more, like maybe you need advice on something like a dynamic in your lab, or you just have kind of a research question and you want to learn more about like that person's experience or their background. For me, I liked that. I think maybe I'm just a little like shy, so I liked the structure at the beginning as I developed the relationship and felt a little bit more comfortable. So I'd say that's my tip. I also have to drop. I have a meeting right at 1 o'clock and it can't really run over. So I really appreciated this opportunity. I'm going to echo Chandler and Stephanie. If you have any questions, you can reach out to me. It's just like christina.finnegan@bayer.com. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Take care.
Thanks, Christina.
And with that, you know, it's a good reminder that it is been about an hour. Unless there's any other questions that anyone wants to ask, I think we can start wrapping up the discussion. Unless there's something our panelists would like to say as kind of our parting words. No, all right, perfect. I mean, I think we've covered everything. Again, I'd like to remind everyone to go to www.plantbreeding.org. links to find the NAPB website, or you can just Google NAPB Borlaug Scholars. I encourage you all to apply. Again, that's March 7th is our deadline on that. There's separate graduate and undergraduate applications. It's, again, a really phenomenal opportunity, and I appreciate everyone for being here today. All right.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.